Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilach, begashmus und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy, physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Shemos, Yud Zayin Tevis, and we will speak a thought for the week, and especially in the trying times that we find ourselves right now. So, as usual, since the war started, we added tzedakah, so we're giving tzedakah now, gedelik tzedakah, shemakareves esagula, Mashiach should come now. We're going to say a prayer, tzedakah, and then tefillah. We said this pasuk last week, but this week we're going to add a different twist, which is going to be connected to the thought that we're speaking about. Shir amaylois, eso'ena yelohorim, me'ayin yovo yezri, a song of ascents. I lift my eyes to the mountains. We spoke about that last week. From where will my help come? And here, as usual, Chassidus lends an interpretation to the verse that transforms it completely. Completely. The literal meaning is, me'ayin yovo yezri, from where will my help come? Chassidus comes along and gives an interpretation that this is not a question, but it's an answer, it's a statement. Me'ayin, from nothingness, Yovoi Ezri, my help will come. Which means, number one, sometimes, me'ayin, when we surrender completely, we reach a state of selflessness, that's when the help will come. And what we do down here allows us to reach midah keneged midah, the level which is in godliness, corresponding. And Chassidus explains something phenomenal. That the level of me'ayin, from nothingness, is the level of keser. You see, there's 10 levels in Seder Shtalshalos, the 10 Sfirot, Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tferes, Netzach, Hoid, Yisoid, Malchus. But then there's keser. And keser is called the Antuchod, the Lo B'chushbin, the one which cannot be counted, because it represents infinity. The other 10 ones are details and defined and limited. But the 11th, sometimes Keser is called the 11th, sometimes it's called the one which cannot be counted. And this is, Me'ayin equals 101, because Keser represents the 101st. 100 represents each one of the 10 koiches, 10 times 10 equal 100. And the 101, the one which is above the 100, goes on Keser. So when we reach a level of transcendence, total selflessness, then we also reach a level of what's called in Seder Shtalshalos, in the order of descent of the worlds, in Kabbalah, in the levels of godliness. Then we also reach the level of Me'ayin, which is the Keser, which that's a level of infinity, which when the help comes from there, it's literally unlimited. And this brings us to this week's Parsha, where, I think I've said this before, two of the psukim in all of Chav Dalet Sifrei Kodesh that inspire me more than others is one pasuk from this week's Parsha, the last pasuk from this week's Parsha Shemos, which gives such a level of empowerment and uplifting to a person, which is unbelievable. And then there's also the verse in the Megillah where it speaks about how Haman thought that he's going to get the honor, and then we see that Achashverosh tells Haman, everything you said now, you described to be done, should be done to Mordechai. When you read it in the Megillah, you just, that's it. Haman is over. Now the pasuk I'm talking about over here in Parsha Shemos is as follows. First we'll say what comes before. So in this week's Parsha starts the real Egyptian exile. Moshe is born, and Hashem chooses Moshe to be the Redeemer, the Deliverer. Moshe has some questions, and they go back and forth, him and Hashem, about his mission, and then he embarks on his mission. He meets up with Aaron, and they go to Paroi. Paroi, of course, is obstinate, and he says, no way. And then Paroi actually makes it worse for the Yidden. As the Psukim say at the end of the Parsha, which is the Shvi of Shemos, and what happens is, Paroi says, don't even give them the straw from which to make the bricks and all what they're meant to do, which means now they're going to have to spend more time just to find the straw, but they still have to have the same quota of produce and productivity that they were living till then. And then Pare came down on the Jews stronger, etc., etc. See the verses over there. And then Moshe met up with some of the Jewish guards, and they gave it to Moshe and Aaron. Vayemer aleim, pasuk Chaf Aleph at the end of the parsha. Yeira Hashem aleichem v'yishpeit asher evashtem es reichenu be'einei Parei uve'einei avodev losses cherev b'yodam lehagenu. So the Yidden, these are Yidden, they then complained to Moshe and Aaron, may Hashem look upon you and judge, if you have made our very scent abhorrent in the eyes of Parei and the eyes of his servants, to place a sword in their hands to murder us. So in other words, after Moshe and Aaron, who were told by Hashem that they would be the redeemers, so when they show up, not only the situation does not improve at all, it actually gets much worse. And Moshe's fellow Jews, so to speak, and Aaron's, are coming to a complaint to them and saying Hashem should punish you. So Vayoshev Moshe el Hashem Vayeimar Hashem Lo Mareis Lo Mazeh Lo Mazeh Shlachtoni. The famous words, why have you sent me? Why have you harmed this people? Umeyoz Bosi el Parei L'daber Bishmecha Heira Lo Mazeh V'hatza Lo Yitzalta Samecha. From the time I came to Parei to speak in your name, he harmed his people, but you did not rescue your people. And here comes the last pasuk from this week's parsha, which is brace yourselves, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem tells Moshe, Ata sireh asher esa lefarei. Now you will see what I shall do to Parei. Ki biyod chazaka yishalchem, uviyod chazaka yigorshem me'atzei. Through a strong hand will he send them out, and through a strong hand will he drive them from his land. So first we'll just mention what Rashi says, and ata now, which is one pshat. Rashi says that the word ata over here is really a harsh statement to Moshe. That since Moshe questioned Hashem, lo mareis lo mazeh, so therefore Rashi says, herat al midoisai, lo chavram shamarti lo ki bitzri yikol v'chazora. Avram didn't question me, even though I told him that the future will be through Yitzchak, and then I told him to sacrifice Yitzchak. But you did question me. You will see the redemption of Egypt and the wonderful miracles that are going to happen now. Now. You're going to see how Parei today. You're going to see what I shall do to Parei. But you will not merit to go into Eretz Yisrael and to see the miracles that I will do in Eretz Yisrael. So that's what Rashi says. And I brought down Rashi because, of course, in every single situation, we should first mention what's the pshat. But over here, obviously, if we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, whatever he said came totally out of Avos Yisrael. He couldn't bear to see the suffering of Bnei Yisrael. So therefore he cries out, Lo mareis lo mazeh. Why does this come according to Pshat? I can't understand everything. But the main point is that over here, we learn something about life and about the history of the Jewish people and about a certain pattern which is so fundamental, so phenomenal, so outstanding, so amazing, that we have to talk about it, because I believe there's nothing as powerful as a story in the Torah, as an actual narrative, Ma'aseh Rav, which then sheds light on the entire history of the Jewish nation, and not only the entire history of the Jewish nation, but even so much so as to the future redemption. And this is the pshat of the Kli Yakar over here. What does the Kli Yakar say over here? Ata sireh. Listen to this. Now that you're seeing it, that it became worse, not even actually better. It's worse than before. Because before you showed up, it wasn't as bad. Now that you showed up, it got worse. So you would think there's one way that we look at the world with our physical eyes, and it seems to go a certain way, and it can't get worse, and it did get worse. and you think that means that situation worse. Comes along the Eibishter and shows us a certain pattern, and this stands for the rest of all time, for Yiddishkeit and for Yidden, that when it got worse, it was actually getting better. And the source of this, and we'll talk about what does it mean in our Avodas Hashem, is this story. After Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Hashem and says, Lo marei yisrael mazeh, it got worse, comes along the answer. The answer is, Ata Sireh. Now at the lowest point, when we hit rock bottom, now you will see the salvation. Because that's the way it works. And this is the words from the Kli Yakar. See the Kli Yakar here, a famous Kli Yakar, where he says, I'm just going to read some of the words, Ki ma yedua shakach hi amida. This is the nature of things. This is the way things work. Shebechol yoim somoch la'alois hashachar, before dawn, hachoshech machshich beyoser min cheshkes halayla. The darkest of the night is before the break of dawn. Then dawn breaks through that darkness and rises. And he brings some other examples. Before the winter, before the end of the winter, it becomes the strongest, the coldest. And this is the way it works. And he says, Ki kol dover tivi hamagish sheba kenegdei eze dover hofchiloi. When something senses that the opposition is coming to exterminate him or annihilate him or take him out, then he tries to counterattack, and the truth is that this is a sign that it's soon going to be over. We'll give soon another example in Avodah. But in any case, this is also very famous during World War II, when the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke many times about the birth pangs of Mashiach. Before the baby is born, the birth pangs are the strongest. So the pain is the most before, and then we come to the birth. And the same thing in the Maimer V'ata Katzava, the Rebbe said the word of Kosis Lamoyer. Through Kosis, then we come to Lamoyer. Then we come to illumination. So first of all, I'll give two examples of this. We'll actually give three examples where it's discussed about Chassidus. Over here, we come to one of the main points in life. And again, this is the sort of thing which we have to engrave in our mind and etch into our hearts again and again, because the nature of the person is to see when things are going bad, to panic and to be in a question. And even Moshe Rabbeinu says, Lo marei yisrael mazeh. But when we learn Teres Chassidus and tells us to look at the world through the lens of Hashem, so to speak, so it gives us the faith, and this sustained us throughout all of history. First of all, the Rabbeinu Bachai over here right away says, and he brings it from a Medrash, that as we saw over here in the Golus of Mitzrayim and the Geula of Mitzrayim, so too it's going to be when Mashiach comes. That Kimeitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois, that it's going to be the same way. That sometimes it has to get worse before it gets better, but the getting worse is part of the plan. That's the way the scheme of things work, because that's the way the Eibishter set it up, etc. We cry out to the Eibishter that already got the worst, and yet we had an October 7th. And it should end right now, and the Geula should come this second. But let's talk about it, how we see it in our Avodas Hashem. So, and how we can understand it. And this is also connected with right now, the entire Lubavitcher community is learning the Maimorim of Yud Shvat, chapter 15. And in chapter 15, we start with the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is the famous contraction, and the whole point of the Maimer that we're learning this year, the focus, is that there's a level called the Maila Adin Ketz, and there's a level of Lamata Mata Adin Tachlis. Now we can't explain it, but the point is that both of these avenues, channels, modes, is involved in creating our physical world, which is like the rock bottom, and we're living in a state of concealment of godliness. And the whole point is that the Jew, in the state of the concealment, understands that it's not a concealment. That's the point. Similar to when we're in the darkest point of the evening, we should realize that it's just a second before the breaking of dawn. And the more we see through the veil of the darkness, that it's really, the concept is that this is a hagdama to coming to the dawn, then the dawn comes. And the more we yearn for the dawn, we see the dawn, it makes the dawn appear earlier. And that's another theme that's in that mimer of chapter 15, where he also explains the famous concept of the tzimtzum is b'shvil hagilui. The whole purpose of the tzimtzum, of the contraction of godliness, was ultimately to come to revelation. However, we can explain it in many different ways. So let's go first with the famous analogy in Chelik Beis of the Kutisichas Dvarim. Many of the things we're speaking now we spoke before, but we'll say it again in brief. Because I believe again it starts from this verse of this week's Pasha, Ata Sireh. To understand that this is the sequence, this is the order, this is the pattern. So in Chelik Beis he gives a famous analogy of the trance of the teacher, that there's a teacher and the teacher is teaching to his students, and while in the midst of teaching, he gets a revelation, a new idea that is connected to what he's teaching to the students. And here he has a dilemma. On the one hand, he knows if he doesn't grasp the new idea, the revelation that's coming to his mind right now, and latch onto it, it's going to disappear forever. Because that's the pattern, Chachma Bina, when you get that ding, and the germ of the idea lights up in your brain, if you don't latch onto it, it will disappear. You have to latch onto it, try to digest it, and take it apart, and then be able to give it over to the students. So now this is the dilemma. On the one hand, if he doesn't latch onto it, it's going to disappear forever. But on the other hand, when he's now going to latch onto this idea to try to integrate it and absorb it, it's going to be seeming to the students as if he's abandoning the students. Because you can't do two things at the same time. You can't be teaching the students and being involved with the students and at the same time latch onto the idea. So the Rebbe says that the analogy is that the teacher actually latches onto the new idea. Because he's a teacher, and because the purpose of a teacher is to reveal more and more wisdom to students, and since this is a new idea, which is a very important idea and the greatest idea, and the idea that wasn't revealed before into the world to students, so therefore he has to latch onto the new idea, even though it's going to seem to be a sense, an abandonment of the students that are in front of him. So that's what the Rebbe says in Chelik Beis, the famous Sikh of Dvarim. So, and the Rebbe's point is, which is repeated many times in the Sikhs in many different ways, that sometimes what seems to be externally bechitzonius as a concealment is really not a concealment, because the whole purpose of that concealment is to come to the greater revelation that goes through the momentarily, seemingly abandonment. And that's what the student has to realize, that the teacher would never abandon the students. And if there's seemingly an abandonment, it's only because later he's going to come to a greater revolution. What's happening in this time that seems to be an abandonment? The new idea is percolating and becoming more unified with the teacher, so they'll be able to give it over better to the students. So the point is, it's all about the students. Galus is all B'shul B'nai Yisrael. And we are like the students. And everything that's going on, every single state of concealment, is because it's coming to a greater revelation. That's the analogy in Chelik Beis, which goes together with the idea of birth and birth pangs. Every single second of pregnancy, the baby is getting more developed the way it's supposed to be. So the longer the baby is in labor, it means usually an improvement and an enhancement of the baby. The baby is getting fully developed. Then we have to go to the birth pangs, and then there's the birth. But we have to realize that the fact that there's previously a state of labor is because it's all part of the development and enhancement. Then it goes through birth pangs, but the birth pangs are because the birth is happening imminently. That's an analogy of a teacher. Now then there's another famous analogy with the Alter Rebbe in chapter 28 of the Tanya. Wow. And in Geras HaKodesh, I think it's Siman 25, but we'll talk more directly from chapter 28, which is based on the explanation of 25 in the Geras HaKodesh. The Alter Rebbe addresses a person as a question. He was davening, and this is the same exact concept, by the way, over here in Shemos. Atosira. He was davening, a person's davening, in the middle of his davening, he gets a machshava zara. He gets a thought that he feels that relative to where he is in his life, serving God, he shouldn't have this idea, this alien thought. Today we have something called intrusive thoughts. It's a big subject in psychology. So this is where it comes from. He's in the middle of davening, and he gets the most intrusive thought, which is alien and foreign to everything he's trying to reach during prayer. So without the Alter Rebbe in chapter 28, the person going through this experience is thinking to himself, what a disaster, what a fail, first class loser. Here I was trying to connect to Hashem, and I'm going, and it's getting better and further, and I feel like I'm getting elevated. All of a sudden, I get hit with a missile, a bomb in central headquarters of my whole prayer, that's bringing me crashing down. A wrecking ball. So therefore, that's a testimony and a sign that my davening was a fail. Comes along the Alter Rebbe in chapter 28, like no one else, and he tells us, no way. Not only it's not a fail, you're a champion. You're a winner. You know why? That machshava zara that you got was a gasping sigh, scream from the Nefesh HaBahamis. Because the Nefesh HaBahamis realized that you're getting somewhere, you're advancing, you're achieving. So this was a counterattack from the Nefesh HaBahamis. So it's not a sign that there's something wrong with your prayer. On the contrary, your prayer is being successful. And the Nefesh HaBahamis feels like it's going down, and therefore it's striking back. So the machshava zara doesn't show that your prayer is a fail. On the contrary, you're winning the war. But this was a counterattack from the Nefesh HaBahamis. And why does the Eibishter make this counterattack? The whole reason why the counterattack comes in the first place is so you should re-intensify and become even stronger. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 28, and he brings a similar analogy in 25 of Yaakov HaKodesh, where a Jew is praying and then there's a goy who's standing and disturbing him. And the Alter Rebbe makes it clear, I should have really read from the inside, how the whole point is that the reason why the Eibishter presented this disturbance was not to be a disturbance, but on the contrary, to make your prayer even stronger. So we see that example from davening. Let's go back to one more famous analogy about Me'ayin Yavi Ezri. And sometimes I think it look in a certain way like it's worse, but really it's better. There's another famous analogy, which comes from the Rebbe Rashab, which he said about Yutas Kislev, the famous analogy of Zayis Kishakoichenoitze Moitzi Samnei. The olive, when it's crushed, that's when he releases the oil. And the famous word is, the meaning is, we have an olive. There's 3 stages to the olive. There's the olive as a fruit. We can eat an olive. People love eating olives. The ones that have been pitted. Then we have oil, olive oil, that comes from crushed olives. The thing is that when the Zayis Kishakoichenoisei, when he's going through a state of kosis, he can't be used for a stage fruit, and we don't have the oil yet. So in a way, we don't have a purpose, a use for it. We can't eat it, and we don't have the oil. But the vort is, that's the whole vort. Sometimes we have to go through this process of Zayis, Kishakoichenoisei, Moitzi Shamnei. The Alter Rebbe had to go through prison in order to get to the real juice, the real core, the real essence of what Torah Chassidus is. He had to go through prison. And the same thing is true in life. Sometimes we have to go through a situation where temporarily it's a state of me'ayin, nothingness. But we have to realize that this whole me'ayin, this is going to bring the salvation. So the Rebbe said many times, and this is very important, that we should accomplish this me'ayin through humility. Humble yourselves before you'll have to be humbled. The Rebbe Rashab said that. So it's the same thing over here. The Rebbe said that by us experiencing humility, coming to a state of nothingness, so that we won't have to experience, we spare ourselves the experience of certain things physically, Hashem Yirachem. So do it in your spiritual Avodas Hashem. And this is what it means over here. When we say, one more example, we're going to bring from Chelik Bey's Parshas Pinchas. The relevance of this. The relevance of this is sometimes also when a person feels that he's facing great difficulties in carrying out a certain mitzvah. And sometimes he thinks to himself, why am I facing difficulties in this area so much? And maybe therefore I should just abandon it and focus on other things. And really this is a very big question, which we don't have enough time to discuss it. And that is, on one hand you could say, a person should focus on where he's talented and just do that sort of thing. Like, for example, you like to play tennis, become a tennis champion. You're good at music, focus on that and become a musician, and so on and so forth. A person should know his qualities, focus on those qualities, and that itself, on the one hand, you could say is proof of where the Eibishter wants you to channel your Avodas Hashem. Like it says, Kabel Hashem mehoincha, megreincha. But on the other hand, there's another side of the coin. That area where you're having difficulties, where you don't want to, and you don't seem to be so successful, you don't want to continue because it seems to be harder, that's exactly where the whole test lies. And if you break through in that field, in that area, everything else will go better. So it is a question, and I'm not going to answer it now and speak to your local mashpia. But now I'm going to speak of the side of the coin which says that area where you're having difficulties, you must also focus on. And I'm just going to read you from Likutei Sichos Chelik Beis, Parshas Pinchas on 347, because this is very important. Then if a person sees in a certain area of his life in serving Hashem this great concealments, is das a raya, that's a proof, adim mitzvah tzemera that proves that this mitzvah, this thing which where he's having difficulties, has even a stronger connection to his soul, to his mission. From them gufa was mishtelt sich and kegen, from the fact that there's such a stronger opposition, is a raya das negeya, that itself proves that it's more important for his role and mission on this world to overcome and be victorious in this area. Even if he doesn't see it, see there, page number 347, and he brings the famous Gemara, which the Rebbe brings in some places, of Vucha b'mayav Zohar Tvei, this discussion of, according to Chassidus, there was a Gemara that said that we asked a certain person, what was your father more careful in? And according to Chassidus, of Vucha b'mayav Zohar Tvei, Zohar Meloshen Zohar, your father's soul was connected to one mitzvah in particular more than other mitzvahs, through which the soul shined. So that's the point. Every one of us has a certain mitzvah. And it could be, maybe if we measure it all up together, it's in both directions. On one direction, it's the area in Avodas Hashem where you feel natural, like you're swimming, like riding a bike. I'm just giving an example. Certain things come natural and easy to you, let's say. So that's an area where you should focus, because on one end, we say that's the ultimate. But on the other end, no. Let's say a person's an addict. He smokes. He has to break that addiction, And if he breaks that addiction, everything else will go easier. And that's why that addiction is something he's struggling with for 10 years or for 15 years. So I think maybe you could say in the final analysis, it works in both directions. Generally speaking, focus on the area where you see more productivity, and it comes easier for you, but even in that area, try to push yourself more and more beyond your limitations. But then also focus on that area in your life where it's the most difficult. Because this goes back together to everything we're speaking about today. Atosire. When we're at a point where it's the greatest darkness, where it seems it's the most hopeless, that's exactly the point where the test is, where all the forces are focused, decisive move, and the other side is putting all the effort in this area because they know that it's so important. Like the Kliyaka says over here, that Paroi becoming now stricter and more cruel was really a counterattack because he knew he's going to be annihilated. He's going to be decimated. He's going to be crushed. And through this we'll see the greatness of Hashem more than ever before. But before that, he focuses all his energies now to try to make a counterattack. So too in our Avodas Hashem, we have to know that wherever we're having sometimes the most difficulties, the most hardship, the most annoying, that's exactly where Klippa is putting all his forces to try to be successful over there, because they know if you'll be successful in this thing, everything else will go much, much easier for you. So whatever the story is, the Eibusher should help that we should be successful in all areas, in the areas of things that come more natural to us. We should make our contribution and bring benefit, but also we have to focus, maybe it's 10 minutes a day, or whatever the story is, speak to your local mashpia, in those areas where we see the greatest darkness, where we see the birth pangs, where we see the painfulness, where we see the causes. And we have to realize that that is the focus. Break through that, because that's where the Klippa is putting all its efforts not to be really annihilated. And they should help right now, and this is why I spoke about this today. Today there was a story about a deal, and it seems like it's not the way the Rabbanim want, it's not the way of Das Torah. Oh yeah, Hashem, 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 bring the Gula Mitzvah Shlema now, Ad Mosai. In the words of Moshe Rabbeinu, may I say, Lo Mareisa Lo Mazeh, why does it have to be on October 7th? Why does it have to be still hostages? Hashem should have Rachmanis, Ono Le'er Rachm Rabim, Al Kol B'nei Yisrael, B'chol Mokim Sheim, and we should take a see, Ato Sireh, we should see Mamish, the Gula Mitzvah Shlema take from Yad Mamish, Kimitzescho, Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Me'eren Neflois, Begula Mitzvah Shlema, take from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, your man in Melbourne.